I was in my rocking chair when my phone lit up with a message that took the heat out of my body. Available balance 0. The kitchen clock ticked in the quiet and the kettle began to whisper before it whistled. My name is Augustine Aggie Monroe. I am 67 years old. I raised one son through storms and thin paychecks in a small Atlanta house that remembers our laughter better than our arguments. I set the phone down and pressed my hand on the counter so I would not fall. I could smell his cologne in the hall from the last time Darius asked for a code to help with an insurance payment. He said it would be easier if he handled the online part. I believed him because I wanted to believe that love still meant trust and that trust still meant safety. The light above the sink buzzed like it knew a secret and would not tell. I opened my red notebook and wrote 2 words. Be still. Then I let the silence answer for me. I grew up understanding numbers the way other girls understood ribbons. Pennies stacked become rent. Dimes stacked become groceries. Quarters stacked become a winter coat from a discount bin. When my marriage broke, I stacked what I had and hid the rest in a jar behind flour and sugar. I worked days at a tire shop desk and nights doing books for a barber 1 street over. Darius slept on the sofa until we found a bed that did not squeak. He was a boy with soft eyes and quick hands and a habit of saying "I got you, mama." I believed him then also. Years rolled by like slow trains. I learned to stretch chicken into soup, to turn old rice into a new meal, to mend a jacket so clean that teachers thought it was new. Church on Sundays. Potlucks on holidays. House repairs done 1 paycheck at a time. When Darius met Keisha Lane, he brought her to the porch on a spring evening that smelled like rain. She smiled wide and looked around with the kind of eyes that measure. Her mother, Ms. Laverne, came later in a dress that tried too hard to be from uptown. She said this neighborhood has a certain grit, and by grit she meant poor. I offered tea anyway. They sipped and whispered and left early because the streetlight flickered. I learned something then. Some people see your front steps and think your soul looks the same. I kept loving anyway because my son asked me to. Years after that I had surgery on my knee. Darius started helping with my online accounts. He set up alerts. He changed my password and wrote it on a slip I could not find later. I told myself this is what family is for. I told myself he is busy and I am old and it is time to let go a little. A week before this day he stopped by to ask for a code for a quick transfer, and I gave it without reading the fine print. The kettle finally screamed. I turned off the flame and poured water I did not drink. The phone rang. Mother Ruth from church asked if I was watching my son on the internet. Rome looks good on him, she said. I opened the app one hate and found him standing by a pile of old stones that survived kings and storms. Keisha leaned into him. Ms. Laverne held a glass like she was born to it. The caption said "New Beginnings" and a small crown. In the comments Keisha wrote "Thank you mama-in-law" with a line of laughing faces. I stared at that line until it stopped moving. I did not cry. I did not ask the Lord to make a show of lightning. I simply listened to my kitchen. The clock kept time. The refrigerator hummed. The house breathed like it was waiting to see what I would do. I pressed call on the bank. A voice that sounded like a hallway told me to enter my card. Then a young man with a name I did not catch read a script he had read 100 times. He said, "Mrs. Monroe, the movements have been online." He said the total is 82,450 over 42 days. He said the largest transfer is 40,000 to an account that shares your last name and your first address. He asked, "Would you like to file a fraud report?" I looked at my red notebook. I looked at the line where I had written "Be still." Then I said, "Yes sir, I would," and he gave me a case number that I wrote twice so I would not lose it. After I hung up, I walked to the shelf with our photographs. Darius in kindergarten with a crooked tie. Darius at 14 trying not to smile because boys at that age are allergic to joy. Darius on his first day at a warehouse job. I touched the glass with my fingers and felt the cold of it go into my hand. I told the pictures I did my part. Now the truth will do its part. I stepped onto the porch. Spring air carried barbecue smoke from 2 houses down and the smell of gasoline from the corner. Children were racing bikes up the block. A mother yelled, "Slow down, baby," and then laughed when her boy did not. I sat and let that ordinary peace climb into my chest. Then I went back inside and opened a drawer I had avoided for months. That drawer held old bills and one envelope with the words "Last Will and Testament" written by a printer that had little ink. My name was on that first page. The signature at the bottom was not mine. The middle initial was wrong. The street number was off by 1. Someone had tried to draw my life on paper so they could fold it and put it in their pocket. I put on my glasses and read every single line. I circled the wrong parts with a blue pen. I photographed each page and saved it to a place on my phone that Darius did not know. Then I wrote in the red notebook, "Find witness. Find dates. Find breath." The shock did not arrive like a scream. It arrived like a chair pulled out from under you when you were about to sit. I stood in my kitchen and let my legs remember their strength. I boiled the kettle again just to hear a sound that belonged to me. I replayed the video from Rome without volume so I could study faces. Darius smiled with his mouth and not with his eyes. Keisha looked at the camera more than she looked at him. Ms. Laverne held her phone like a queen holds a scepter. I paused on a frame where a waiter placed a silver card machine on the table. I smiled a small smile no one could see and said out loud not a prayer but a promise. Truth will walk in. I called our neighbor Jerome Atkins who used to work with Darius at a logistics firm. He picks up on the second ring and says, "Miss Aggie, I was thinking of you." I ask him if he has any old emails where Darius talked about travel or accounts. He hesitates and says I should not be in folks' business. Then he says there is one thing. He forwards an email chain where Keisha mentions opening a new account in Spain. She wrote use your mom while you set it up. Jerome sends it and says please do not use my name unless you need to. I write his name in pencil in the red notebook so I can erase it if he changes his mind. In the evening I walk to church because I do not want to sit alone with my thoughts too long. The choir is not rehearsing tonight. The sanctuary is dark. The fellowship hall light is on. Mother Ruth is there counting receipts from the food pantry. She looks up and reads my face in one glance the way old women read storms. She makes tea that tastes like comfort and asks nothing until I start talking. I show her the bank text and the photo from Rome and the fake will. She nods slow. She says, "Child, I need you to write down your timeline for me. Every code. Every day he asked for it. Every note he left. We are going to build a road so straight that even a blind man can follow it." She tells me to call Adult Protective Services in the morning and to file a report. She writes down the number. She tells me to ask the bank for a Regulation E fraud claim packet and to get the case number printed on paper. She says bring all of it to legal aid and ask for Mr. Caleb Porter because he has a spine and a calm voice. She also tells me to sleep with the red notebook under my pillow and I laugh because it sounds like superstition and she says no child, it is to remind you that evidence is your lullaby. I go home with lighter feet than I had at noon. The moon is not bright but it is sure. I wash my cup and place it upside down to dry. I write in the red notebook again. I copy the case number. I list the dates. I add a note that says call bank to ask for login logs. I set my phone on the table and it buzzes again with another picture from Rome. Darius is in a white shirt. Keisha has on sunglasses because you cannot see a lie if your eyes are hidden. Ms. Laverne is holding a bag that looks like it cost a month's rent. I whisper to the picture, "Enjoy. This is the last meal you buy with money that does not belong to you." Then I turn off the phone and let the house darken around me. In the morning I will begin. Tonight I will be still so I remember what a mother sounds like when she refuses to scream. 3 days from this minute my son will call me with tears in his throat. Before that day arrives I choose the weapon I know best. Paper. I will let the truth walk in on its own feet. Family, where are you listening from? Tell me your city because tonight you heard how a mother learned to breathe with no money in her account and her dignity still in place. I woke before the sun and sat on the edge of my bed until the house remembered I was there. The clock in the kitchen ticked like a metronome and the kettle began its slow song. I told myself one sentence. Do the next right thing. I called the bank and asked for the Regulation E fraud claim packet and for a printed confirmation of my case number. The young man said he would email a secure link, and I said email is not enough, please mail a copy. And place a note on the file that the account holder is a senior reporting suspected elder financial abuse. He cleared his throat and said yes ma'am, and I wrote his name, time and extension in my red notebook. Next I called Adult Protective Services. The woman who answered had a voice that sounded like a porch in summer. She asked me to speak slowly, and she let me finish every sentence before she asked another question. She wrote down Darius Monroe and the dates and the amount, and she said I am opening an intake and you will receive a reference number. If you have documents, keep them and do not confront anyone directly. I thanked her. When I hung up I placed the reference number beside the bank case number, and I drew a small square around both like 2 bricks in the first row of a wall. Mother Ruth knocked at 9 with a paper folder and a jar of peach preserves. She said I do not show up empty. We sat at the table. She taught me how to download my statements from the bank portal and how to print the login history that showed access from a device that was not mine. I highlighted the hours when Darius had been in my house asking for codes. I copied screenshots to a thumb drive she brought and we labeled it with tape. Then she looked at me over the rims of her glasses and said, "Child, you are going to want to preach, but today we do not preach, we prepare." I nodded. We added the text message that said available balance 0. We added the photographs of the will draft with the wrong middle initial. We added the image from Rome where a card reader sat like a small mirror on the table. We walked to the legal aid office after lunch because my legs wanted movement, and my mind wanted a witness who knew the law. The waiting room smelled like fresh coffee and lemon cleaner. A receptionist in a blue sweater took my name and said Mr. Caleb Porter would see us. When he entered, he did not start with questions. He started with a glass of water and a quiet hello. I handed him the folder. He turned each page once slowly and then again more quickly. He said, "Mrs. Monroe, here is what we can do. We submit the bank claim formally with your timeline. We ask the bank fraud unit for device-level logs and signature comparisons. We file your APS intake number with our packet so agencies can talk to one another. We notify the District Attorney Elder Abuse Unit that you are seeking restoration and protection, not spectacle. We will not chase anyone. We will let the paper walk." He asked about the will draft. I told him how I found it and what looked wrong. He said we can prepare an affidavit of denial of execution and a statement about the circumstances of discovery. It may not be a charge by itself, but it paints the picture. He asked if I wanted to confront Darius. I said no. He wrote that down. He asked if I wanted to be present if he had to sign anything later. I said I would decide when the time came. He nodded as if he understood the part of a mother's heart that wants to be there for the stitch but not for the cut. On the way home my phone buzzed. A message from Jerome Atkins. "Miss Aggie, I found something." He had an email thread where Keisha talked about opening a new account overseas and about using my profile to bridge it. Jerome said he should not have read it, but he was copied once by mistake and kept the archive. He forwarded the chain and I saved it to the thumb drive. I wrote his name again in pencil. I told him thank you and I told him that a man who tells the truth is a bridge that does not break. That evening I gathered the papers on my table and built the first timeline. The text from the bank with the 0. The call record with the case number. The APS intake. The screenshot of the device that was not mine. The email chain from Jerome. The draft of a will with the wrong middle initial. The photo from Rome with the caption New Beginnings. I arranged them in order and then I wrote the story the way a bookkeeper writes a ledger. Date. Time. Amount. Access. I included small things that might look like nothing. The day the porch light flickered. The hour Darius asked for the code. The moment the kettle whistled like a train leaving a station. When I was finished, the page looked like a field of fence posts and I felt safer because lines were holding. I slept with the red notebook under my pillow like Mother Ruth told me to. In the morning my phone rang with an unknown number, and I answered because I am done being afraid. It was the bank fraud team. A woman named Ellen asked if I authorized any transfers to an account ending in the same 4 digits as Darius' old address. I said I did not. She said the bank had placed a hold and would be looking at signatures and device patterns, and would get back to me within 10 business days. I said 10 days is a long time when the refrigerator hums like a question. She said I understand and I will mark your file for callback if anything moves sooner. I wrote her name and the time and I thanked her for saying I understand because sometimes those words are better than medicine. Later that day APS called back. The caseworker asked if I had family who might retaliate if they learned I had filed. I thought about Keisha laugh and Ms. Laverne's steady disdain and I said I would prefer no contact for now. The worker said they could coordinate with the DA to send a soft notice to the parties that a report exists and that services are available. She reminded me that the goal is safety and restoration more than punishment. I said amen to that. I do not want a cage. I want a calendar that my mind can trust again. In the afternoon I pulled out the envelope labeled Last Will and Testament and looked again. The signature was a mimic of my own but the stroke on the G was wrong. The notary stamp line was blank. The text called Darius by a nickname he has not used since he was 12. I took photos with my phone against a dark kitchen towel so the paper edges would show. I wrote a note to myself. Ask Caleb if filing an affidavit regarding false testament drafts is useful or if it is noise. Mother Ruth came by with collard greens and cornbread, and the kind of comfort that does not require conversation. We ate and then we walked the block because she believes a body in motion helps a mind stay steady. She told me 3 proverbs her grandmother used to say. A hot head makes a cold supper. A closed mouth is still a mouth that breathes. A paper cut heals faster than a broken jaw. We laughed at the last one and then we were quiet again. At dusk my phone buzzed with a new picture from Rome. Darius wore a crisp shirt and a smile that looked like borrowed clothes. Keisha lifted a glass and leaned toward the camera so the focus loved her more. Ms. Laverne held a shopping bag where the logo did not need a caption. I turned the sound off and studied the background. A server set a silver reader on the table. A shadow crossed Darius' face that you would miss if you were not his mother. I whispered, "You feel it, son, even if you do not have the words." I set the phone down and opened the drawer where I keep old stamps and recipes. I found the letter my ex-husband sent when he left and I realized betrayal has a smell and a weight and a calendar. It presses on your chest and steals the names of the days. That night I wrote a letter I did not send. I told Darius that love is not a tap you can open when you are thirsty and close when you are satisfied. I told him that I remember his small hand on my neck when fever scared him. I told him that I am not the enemy. When I finished I folded the page and placed it inside the red notebook. The kettle exhaled and the clock answered and the house settled. I slept like a field after rain. The next day brought the first hard proof from outside my kitchen. Caleb called to say the bank had acknowledged the claim, and that the DA Elder Abuse Unit had logged the packet. He said they would not be knocking on doors and making a scene. He said they would send a letter asking for voluntary cooperation, and that a failure to respond could complicate things if the facts leaned toward prosecution. He asked if I wanted to request a temporary restraining order against contact by Keisha or Ms. Laverne. I said not yet. I am more tired than afraid. He said then let us keep building the file. He asked if I was willing to allow a home visit from APS. I said yes because my house has nothing to hide except the ache behind my ribs. By late afternoon Jerome texted again. He had found a calendar invite from 2 months ago with a subject line that read new account flight. The invite included a seat number and a confirmation code. He said he should not have it and he did not want trouble, and I told him the truth does not punish the hand that holds it. I saved the details and sent them to Caleb, who said the information helped build a timeline that could speak without me raising my voice. On the 3rd morning after the freeze I brewed tea and set it beside the notebook. The phone rang. I recognized my son's number, and I let it ring twice so my heart could take its seat. When I answered I heard a sound I have heard before from him, but not since he was little and running a fever. He said, "Mama, what did you do?" I said, "I did not do anything to you, son. I did something for myself." He said, "The accounts are locked and the embassy wants to see me and I cannot pay the hotel and Keisha is furious and Ms. Laverne says this is your doing." I said the bank is doing what banks do when they see a storm and the embassy is doing what embassies do when citizens need a table where papers can face the light. He said, "Do you hate me?" I said, "I am not spending that kind of energy. Learn." He cried and then he breathed and then he hung up. I placed the phone on the table and pressed my palm flat beside it until my hand stopped shaking. After I hung up I went to church and sat in the back while a few women set up chairs for a health fair. The air smelled like floor wax and lemon. I breathed and I let my shoulders drop. Mother Ruth pressed my hand and did not ask for a report. She knows that a mother who has chosen paper does not need an audience. She needs time. That evening Caleb called with a plan for the days ahead. The bank would complete its review and respond with a written decision. APS would schedule a home visit to verify my safety and to connect me with any resources I might want, including counseling. The DA office would hold the packet and would reach out to Darius with an invitation to provide a statement and to sign any acknowledgments the bank required. If he cooperated and the funds could be returned at least in part, the office might consider a restorative pathway instead of a courtroom. If he refused, the paper would keep walking in the direction it was already going. He asked if I was sleeping. I said some. He said, "Right before you sleep and after you wake, and let the sentences carry the weight." I placed my notebook on the table and looked around my kitchen. The same little house I had cleaned after double shifts and Sunday dinners now looked like an office of truth. I felt the grief of that and then I felt the pride of it too. Family, if you are listening, tell me your city and tell me if you have ever had to choose a quiet kind of courage. The kettle began to sing again and I turned off the flame and let the calm arrive. The morning after Darius called in tears, I set my table like a desk and told myself that strategy is mercy wearing work clothes. Caleb Porter called at 9 and spoke in a voice that could steady a sail. He said the bank had logged the Regulation E claim and created a provisional credit review timeline. He said our next move was to strengthen 3 fronts at once: financial containment, legal alignment, documentation discipline. I wrote those 3 lines in my red notebook, and under each one I listed steps we could do today. For financial containment, we asked the bank to remove Darius as an authorized contact on any of my profiles, and to require in-person verification for changes to beneficiary information. We set a new passcode that only I and Caleb knew, and we asked for device fingerprinting to be flagged on my account, so that any unfamiliar login would trigger an automatic lock, and a callback to Caleb as counsel of record. We place fraud alerts with the 3 credit bureaus because thieves do not always stop at money, they can also borrow your name. We asked for a printout of my signature card on file so their team could compare strokes. For legal alignment, Caleb filed a supplement to the bank claim that included the Adult Protective Services intake number and a concise affidavit in which I attested to the timeline of access requests by Darius and to the discovery of a draft will with an incorrect middle initial. He sent the same packet to the District Attorney Elder Abuse Unit with a cover letter that requested restoration and safety resources rather than a headline. He also contacted the American Citizen Services Office at the United States Embassy in Rome and requested an appointment where Darius could appear with identification and sign an acknowledgement of non-ownership and a separation of access statement suitable for the bank to rely on. ACS replied within a day and scheduled a slot. They noted they could notarize my affidavit remotely through approved procedures and would provide a letter confirming a citizen services interaction took place. I wrote their contact name in my notebook and underlined it. For documentation discipline, I made copies of everything. I kept originals in a zip envelope Mother Ruth had labeled with her steady hand, and I placed that envelope in a shoebox that used to hold Darius' baby sneakers. I created a simple index in pencil: text alert, bank case, APS intake, DA cover letter, embassy contact, Jerome emails, will draft photos, timeline ledger. I did not travel. I did not need to chase anyone. My house became a quiet command post where the kettle sang on schedule, and the clock kept witnesses honest. The first alert of the day was small but real. Ellen from the bank fraud team called to say that device analysis showed logins from a laptop not associated with my usual patterns, and that one access session aligned with the hour Darius had asked me to read him a one-time code over the phone. She said they would escalate and that provisional credit might be considered pending the additional acknowledgments. I thanked her and wrote exactly what she said with the minute and the second because details are a mother's armor. In the afternoon, APS arrived for a home visit. The caseworker was a woman in her 50s with careful eyes. She looked not only at my papers but at my refrigerator, at my door locks, at the stack of church bulletins by the phone. She asked if I felt safe, and I said I felt safer with a plan than I did with silence. She gave me a pamphlet about support groups for seniors who have experienced financial abuse, and asked permission to coordinate with the DA and with the bank to avoid duplication. I granted it. Before she left, she touched my elbow in a way that belonged to the women who raised us, and she said, "You are doing the right thing slowly." That evening, Jerome sent another thread he had discovered while cleaning his work archive. A calendar invitation titled New Account Flight included a booking number and a departure date that lined up with the first big transfer from my savings. He also found a chat excerpt where Keisha wrote to him by mistake because she meant to message someone else. It read, "When we get back we will set the Spain thing right and then we are done with his mother." The words sat on my screen like cold ash. I saved the files and sent them to Caleb, who replied within minutes. He wrote, "This strengthens the narrative of intent and control by others and will help the bank and the DA weigh cooperation pathways." He suggested a no-contact letter through counsel to Keisha and to Ms. Laverne that simply instructed them to address any statements or questions through him until the investigation concluded. I approved it because my piece needed a shield and my phone needed light. The next morning we executed the second phase of financial containment. I visited my bank branch with Mother Ruth so that a teller who had known me for years could witness me sign a fresh signature card. We changed my debit card number and set a low daily limit with manual approval required for any exceptions. I opened a new savings account that would not be visible through my old online profile and asked for paper statements only. The branch manager walked me to a notary who witnessed my affidavit denying any knowledge or execution of the will draft. I paid the small fee with cash from a kitchen jar because dignity pays its way even when money is tight. We left the branch and I breathed in the warm air and remembered the day I brought Darius to open his first teen account. He had smiled without fear then. Memory is a coin that spins both ways. That afternoon Caleb called to rehearse our posture for the embassy appointment. He said I would not be present in Rome but my voice could be if needed by phone. He said Darius would be asked to present identification and to sign an acknowledgement that he had managed or accessed his mother's account without authorization, and that he understood the bank would rely on his statement to separate and protect the account going forward. He said if Darius refused to sign, the bank would still have the logs in our affidavit and the DA would record the refusal. If he signed, then restoration could move faster. Either way, the truth would not depend on a mood. He asked if I wanted to send a personal note to Darius to be delivered through the ACS officer. I thought about that too long for my own comfort. In the end, I wrote 11 words. I am not your enemy. Choose the truth and let it stand. I gave the note to Caleb and asked him to send it if the moment felt right. While we worked, the outside world kept moving. Keisha tried to call me twice. I did not answer. A text arrived from a number I did not know that said stop spreading lies and unlock the funds. Caleb advised me to save it and not respond. Ms. Laverne posted a photo of a fancy doorway with a caption heavy with pride. People show you who they are when they think the bill belongs to someone else. I folded laundry and I watered the plant in the kitchen window. I wrote in my notebook the sentence that would hold me together. A mother's quiet is not surrender. It is strategy that refuses to shout. The day before the embassy appointment, Ellen from the bank called again. She said provisional credit for part of the funds might be applied pending the outcome of the acknowledgement because of my age and the strength of my documentation. She cautioned that full restoration could take time, but that the bank recognized the pattern of elder abuse in the file. I thanked her, and when I hung up I let myself cry for exactly 1 minute by the sink where I have washed chicken and collards in jars for longer than some people have kept their vows. Only 1 minute. Then I dried my face and went back to my list. I prepared a small packet for Caleb to share if appropriate. Photocopies of the emails, the will draft images, the timeline ledger, my letter with those 11 words. I placed everything in order and clipped it and labeled it with a piece of masking tape. Mother Ruth came by with soup and prayer, and I told her I would prefer her humming to her words tonight. She hummed an old hymn that used to make the children in choir stand up straighter. When she left, I sat in the dark and listened to my house breathe, and I pictured the embassy room where my son would sit on a chair he did not choose. The morning of the appointment arrived like a held breath released. Caleb joined the ACS call from his office. I sat at my table with a cup of tea and the red notebook open. The officer introduced himself and confirmed Darius' identity. I could hear the scrape of a chair and the paper shuffle of a man trying to decide if he is still a boy. The officer explained that the bank had requested a notarized statement clarifying that the account at issue belonged solely to Augustine Monroe, and that any prior access or transfers done under her name or credentials were not authorized by her. He said the statement would not itself be a criminal charge, but that it would be provided to the bank and could be shared with relevant authorities. He asked Darius if he understood. Darius said in a small voice that he did. The officer then asked if Darius had used my login or caused transfers from my savings. Darius hesitated long enough for my tea to go cold, and then he whispered yes. The officer said you will be asked to sign the acknowledgement and the separation of access statement and to initial next to each paragraph. Caleb asked if my 11-word note could be read. The officer read it aloud. I am not your enemy. Choose the truth and let it stand. There was a quiet that felt like a church during a thunderstorm, and then I heard Darius exhale the way he did as a child when a fever finally broke. He said, I will sign. The officer guided him through the pages and then stated for the record that the documents were signed and notarized and would be transmitted to the bank by close of business. When the call ended, I did not cheer. I pressed my palm to the cool table and I thanked God for a path that had no fists in it. Within hours, Ellen emailed Caleb a confirmation that the bank had received the embassy packet and that they would proceed with account separation, and with next steps on provisional credit and restoration. She also said the bank would issue new credentials and would block any devices previously linked. Caleb forwarded me the message and wrote one sentence. The stage is set. We closed the day by securing my edges. I changed the lock on my front door and installed a simple doorbell camera that my neighbor helped me set up. I gathered my jewelry and a few documents and placed them in a small fire safe under the bed. I listed anyone who had keys and asked each to return them or let me replace them. I told my voicemail that I was unavailable and that urgent matters should be directed to my attorney. I put a note on the fridge that said breathe, drink water, write a line. I slept and dreamed not of Rome but of the laundromat where I once folded so many shirts that my fingers remembered other people's lives. Morning brought small ripples. APS called to confirm that a victim advocate could accompany me to any future bank appointments. The DA office left a message that they had received copies of the embassy acknowledgments and would log them. Caleb called to say that voluntary cooperation by Darius would be considered in any charging decision, and that restitution arrangements could be discussed if the bank determined the final loss amounts. He reminded me that our aim was simple: safety first, restoration next, accountability with dignity always. In the afternoon, the quiet broke in a way I had expected but still felt like thunder. A video surfaced online of the embassy building steps after the appointment. Someone had recorded Darius standing alone with a paper envelope. He wiped his face and looked like a man who could hear his own choices echo. I was not there in body, but I was there in the line he spoke when a stranger asked if he was all right. He said, "My mother is not my enemy. The internet will do what it always does," but the part that matters was not the comments. It was the fact that words I had written in a steady hand had walked into the light and stood up on their own. That night I set out what remained of my cash in small piles and wrote new budgets for the next 2 months. I called the utility company and asked for a senior plan that would even out my bills. I scheduled a free session with a counselor through a support group APS had recommended. I sat on the porch and watched the neighborhood move like a river. Children braided each other's hair. A boy practiced free throws with a milk crate hoop. Across the street, a couple argued softly and then laughed because marriage is a house that needs both hammer and blanket. I thought about my own vows and about the day they broke and about how I survived by learning to count what I could control. Paper does not make a heart whole. It makes a path through the dark. Before bed, I wrote the final lines for this act in my red notebook. Freeze held. Alert sent. Stage set. Tomorrow will bring a consequence I did not design and a mercy I did not expect. I closed the notebook and I did not pray for thunder. I asked only for the strength to stay quiet long enough for the truth to keep walking. The embassy room was not a courtroom, yet when the door closed and the officer spoke, it felt like every quiet promise in my red notebook had taken a seat. I was not there in person, but the line carried my breath. The officer repeated the instructions and Darius signed the pages that separated my life from his choices. When the pens were capped, there was no applause. Only the sound of paper sliding into a file that would travel farther than anger ever could. Outside on the stone steps, a tourist with a small camera asked if he was all right and Darius said, "My mother is not my enemy." That sentence moved like a seed thrown into wind. It landed on phones in Atlanta before the sun set over Rome. I learned about the clip when Mother Ruth knocked with her phone in her hand and her mouth set in that way that means both sorrow and pride. "People are already talking, child," she said, "the good kind and the messy kind." I watched the video once. My son's face carried years he had not yet lived, and when he spoke I heard the boy who used to tuck his chin in my neck when fever shook him. I did not watch it again. I turned off the sound and set the phone down and told the kettle to sing. The next morning public exposure began in small ways. A cousin I had not heard from in a decade texted, "You okay, Aggie?" A woman from church sent a row of heart emojis, then called to say she had seen the steps where Darius stood. A neighbor posted that dignity is a mother's strongest currency. At the barbershop on the corner, men paused over clippers to talk about sons and respect, and how it is easier to borrow from a bank than from your mama's bones. The talk did not lift my bills and it did not fill my refrigerator, but it carried a lesson through doors I could never open by myself. That afternoon the bank called with a measured voice. Ellen said the embassy acknowledgments had arrived, that device analysis matched our timeline, and that the bank would issue a provisional credit to cover basic expenses while they finished the review. I thanked her without spilling one extra word, and after I hung up I stood at the sink with my hands on the cool edge and let 5 slow breaths reset my chest. I told myself do the next right thing. I went to the branch and met a victim's advocate from APS in the lobby. The branch manager shook my hand like she was greeting a pastor after service. We sat in a glass room where sunlight showed every fingerprint. The advocate laid out the paperwork and the manager reviewed my new signature card and confirmed that my online profile had been rebuilt with new credentials and with a hard block on any device that was not mine. She asked if I wished to pursue any bank-driven complaint against third parties. I said I wished for separation and safety first and that the rest would be handled by people whose titles allowed them to carry heavier stones. When I stepped outside, a young reporter from a local station was setting up a camera. She asked if I wanted to say a word about elder financial abuse in families. I looked at the advocate who tipped her head as if to say this could educate the next mother. I agreed if we could stand by the community bulletin board, where flyers for food drives and choir rehearsals live. The reporter asked, how does it feel to see your story shared online? I said I am not a headline. I am a mother who chose paper and quiet. I said something wrong happened in my home, and there is a way to make it right without burning down the street. She asked what I would say to people who think forgiveness means forgetting. I said forgiveness does not erase. It reorganizes the room so you can walk without tripping on the same chair. The camera light went off and I felt the heat leave my face like steam leaving a pot. That evening the clip aired between a weather report and a story about a school board vote. In the fellowship hall after Bible study, people asked careful questions. A deacon's wife whispered that her sister had lost her savings to a nephew with fast talk and slow conscience. A man with retired hands said paperwork saved him when a cousin tried to sign his name. Stories poured out like water from a roof after a long drought. Mother Ruth looked at me the way a choir director looks at a soloist who is afraid to step forward. She said, would you speak on Sunday between the second hymn and the tithe? Not to name names. To name the sin and the cure. I felt the room shift before I knew my answer. I said yes. On Sunday morning the sanctuary smelled like starch and perfume and old wood polished by years of hands. The choir wore robes the color of a good peach. I sat on the front pew with my red notebook closed on my lap. After the second hymn the pastor nodded to me. I stood and walked to the pulpit where my hands had once held a microphone to announce a bake sale. I did not bring a speech. I brought a truth that had been weighed on a kitchen scale. I said my name is Augustine Monroe and I am here because what happened to me is happening in quiet to too many elders who think love is a lock that cannot be picked. I said I am not here to shame my child. I am here to teach my village. I spoke of Regulation E and APS and the district attorney unit not to flex knowledge but to show a door that can be opened. I held up the timeline I had written and I said a mother's silence is not surrender. It is evidence. The room breathed together then. A low sound like wind in pine. I felt the moment arrive as clearly as I feel the click when my door latch meets the frame. I looked into the camera of a young woman from the youth ministry who was recording for the church page, and I said the line that had been living under my tongue. You took my money but you cannot spend my dignity. The choir hummed one note without planning it. Somebody near the back whispered amen like a thread pulling through cloth. The pastor said teach Aggie and I felt a strength that did not come from rage. It came from the long patience of floors swept after double shifts. After service people lined up not for gossip but for resources. The victim advocate stood beside a table with forms. The bank manager had sent brochures. A volunteer wrote down the APS hotline number for anyone who wanted it on a small card they could tuck in a wallet. We ran out of copies before we ran out of need. By evening the church video had been shared more times than our Christmas pageant. A blogger for elders reposted the clip with a caption about boundaries that made sense to tired hearts. Comments arrived in language that knew our kitchens. My cousin in Detroit wrote, I felt that in my bones. A stranger in Houston wrote, my aunt is going through this. Thank you for saying the quiet part out loud. Not all talk was kind. Some said a mother should handle family business behind curtains. Some said I had ruined my child's future. I did not argue. A river does not answer stones. It keeps moving and makes a path around them. The next day public exposure grew teeth. Keisha posted a photo of a suitcase with a caption about women who refused to be stepped on. People asked soft questions at first. Then someone linked to the Embassy Steps video. Someone else posted the church clip where I said my line. The comments turned and the suitcase post vanished. I did not clap my hands. I watched the stove flame turn blue and even. Ms. Laverne tried a different tactic. She left a message on my phone saying we could settle this privately if I would show mercy and unlock funds. I forwarded the message to Caleb and deleted it from my voicemail. He sent a no-contact reminder to her counsel. Public exposure kept walking past whatever doors they tried to close. A community radio show invited me to speak. I went because radio reaches elders who prefer a voice over a screen. The host asked what justice looked like to me. I said justice looks like a bank that believes a woman when she says that signature is not her hand. It looks like a son who signs his own name to his own choices. It looks like a church where the ushers know the hotline number and will write it down for you on the back of a fan if you are too shy to ask at a table. The host was quiet a beat and then he said, "My mama would have liked you, Miss Aggie." In the middle of the week a new clip surfaced. It showed Darius standing outside a small hotel, speaking to someone off camera. He said, "I thought I was following love. I was following fear of being less." He said, "I did not want to be the son from the block who never left, so I tried to buy a life that would do the leaving for me." The comments were hard and some were kind. I watched once and then I turned off my phone because there is a limit to how much a heart should carry in public. That night I cooked collards and cornbread and invited 2 neighbors to eat because food turns talk into listening. We spoke about grandchildren and potholes and the boys who play ball in the street. We did not mention Rome. We did not have to. Rome had already walked into our block and been told to sit down and behave. The following Sunday the church hosted a forum with the district attorney, elder abuse unit, and a bank officer. The fellowship hall was full before the coffee cooled. The panel explained what to look for when a relative asks for access. They taught elders to keep a list of passwords separate from the phone that holds them. They explained how a provisional credit works and why patience is part of restoration. I sat in the front row with my notebook closed because some chapters are better heard than written. When the questions ended, the pastor asked if I would close with a word. I stood and I looked at faces I have known for decades, faces that had cried with me at funerals and laughed with me at baptisms. I said, "We are a people who survive by memory and by paper. We save receipts and we keep programs and we write the names of babies on envelopes so we do not forget the order of things. Keep that habit. Keep it like you keep your breath when you walk upstairs." I said, "Some sons and daughters will be angry at this forum. Some will say you do not trust me. Tell them I trust you when you make your own money and your own choices in your own name." The applause was the kind that is more prayer than noise. Later that afternoon a local news site published a small profile with my photo on the porch. The headline called me a grandmother activist. I am not an activist. I am a mother who refuses to be erased from her own ledger. But if that word helps another woman stand up, then I will wear it for a day and lay it on the chair by night. Public exposure reached its highest tide the day the bank finalized their finding. Ellen called and said the review had confirmed unauthorized access, and that they were granting restoration of funds to the extent policy allowed. She explained the numbers and the timeline and what I should expect in the mail. I thanked her and then I asked if she would mind sharing a single sentence for our church forum flyer. She said yes. She sent a line that read, "Report quickly, document everything, let the process protect you." We printed that line and taped it to the fellowship hall wall near the water fountain. Not every story ends with money returning. I know that. Many mothers will not see restoration. Some will only get a letter and a number. But public exposure does not promise wealth. Promises light. And light invites hands to help you walk. Near sundown I sat on my porch and watched the street settle. A boy rode past with a trumpet case and a smile. The couple across the way folded laundry together and bumped shoulders. A stray dog trotted like it had somewhere to be. My phone buzzed and I almost did not pick up. It was Darius. He said, "Mama, I watched the church video." He said, "I heard what you said about dignity and evidence." He said, "I do not deserve your voice standing on my behalf." I said, "You do not stand on my behalf. You stand on your own and decide which way forward keeps you honest." He asked if he could come by to leave something. I said, "The porch is yours on Sunday afternoon, not before and not inside." He said, "Yes, ma'am," and there was relief in his tone because boundaries are a kind of mercy for people who cannot yet trust themselves. That night I wrote the line that will live at the heart of this act. "You took my money, but you cannot spend my dignity." A mother's silence is not surrender. It is evidence. Public exposure is not rage. It is light that refuses to blink. Then I closed the red notebook and turned off the lamp and let my house rest. The crash back home did not look like flashing lights or cuffs. It looked like a card machine that chirped once and then refused to blink green while a waiter waited with a face trained not to move. In Rome, Darius tried the card again and the chirp answered with a red refusal, and the table went quiet in a way that told him this was not a hiccup. Keisha shifted in her chair and stared at him as if he had become a stain she could not scrub out. Ms. Laverne rolled her lips inward and looked away toward a door where people who pay their own way were coming and going. He tried a different card and then a third, and then he looked at the waiter like a boy looks at a teacher when he forgot the homework he promised to bring. The waiter spoke softly and asked if there was another method. Darius said, "Give me 1 minute," and stood and stepped outside with his phone. I did not see this moment, but I could translate it because I have stood under the same sky when life showed its teeth. He called the bank and hit a wall of recorded options until a voice came on and told him what he already knew. The account is under review and there is a freeze for suspected elder abuse. He said those words out loud and heard how they sounded in the air next to him. He went back inside and told the truth he could carry. "My cards are not working. I will fix it." Keisha did not whisper. She said, "Fix it now." Ms. Laverne said, "You dragged us across an ocean to embarrass us." The manager came and spoke with courtesy and a kind of weight that says the check will be paid one way or another. Darius used the last bills in his wallet and left a tip he could not afford, and they walked out as if the stones under their feet were judging their shoes. That night in the small hotel room, Keisha packed one suitcase and said, "I am not sleeping here another night." Darius asked her where she would go, and she said, "Anywhere that is not a dead end." Ms. Laverne called a driver and carried the bag with the logo that did not need a caption. The door closed on their perfume and on the echo of the word useless. Darius sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the envelope that held the papers he had signed. He had agreed to the truth in a room where no one praised him for it, and now the bill was coming due in the currency of pride and comfort. In the morning he went to the embassy to ask one more question about travel because fear makes even men who claim to be brave ask for directions. The officer explained what awaited him at home. A request to meet with an investigator from the District Attorney Elder Abuse Unit. A request to speak with the bank about restitution options. A reminder that cooperation is not magic, but it matters. He nodded and bought a return ticket with a mixture of cash and a mercy wire from a friend who believed in second chances more than he should. On the plane he watched clouds and tried to give them names the way children do when they are bored and want the sky to be a story that belongs to them. He landed in Atlanta with a face that had aged a little and walked past a row of advertisements for credit he could not get. At customs, a polite officer scanned his passport and saw a note to refer him to secondary screening. The room was plain and quiet. A man with a tired tie asked him a few questions and recorded a few answers and let him go with a piece of paper that explained who to call and when to show up. There were no handcuffs. There was a date on a calendar that would not move no matter how he begged. He took a bus because taxis cost stories he did not have the energy to tell. On the bus he held the envelope and tried not to open it because the feel of the paper told him everything he needed to know. At a stop near our neighborhood he stepped off and the air smelled like fried food and wet concrete. He walked past the barber where men talk about the Falcons and mortgages and the way a son should treat his mother. He walked past the church sign that advertised a forum on protecting elders, and he looked away as if letters could burn. He rented a room by the week at a place where towels are thin and promises thinner. The clerk slid a key across a counter that had seen better hands. He slept and then he did not. He ate and then he did not. Shame is not a diet, but it starves a man all the same. In the morning he called the number on the paper and reached a woman whose voice was softer than the office she sat in. She set an appointment for an intake and reminded him to bring identification and any documents he wished to share. He said yes ma'am and heard the way that sounded in his mouth. He called the bank and was routed to Ellen, who explained calmly that restoration was being processed and that any restitution discussion would be structured by policy and by what the investigation determined about his role. He said I signed what the embassy asked me to sign, and she said thank you and we will note your cooperation. He called Keisha and got silence that tasted metallic. He called Ms. Laverne and got words that broke apart in the middle. He walked to a diner and tried to order coffee and heard himself say please in a tone that made the waitress look at him with the kind of mercy that does not ask for background. When the day of the intake came, he put on the shirt he had worn to first interviews years ago. The collar felt like a memory that did not want to touch his skin. At the district attorney office he sat across from a man who could have been his cousin and a woman who could have been mine. They asked him to tell the story with simple words. He said, I used my mother's login and I moved money I did not earn and I let someone tell me it was just borrowing early. He said I signed a separation at the embassy. He said I am willing to make payments for the rest of my life if I have to. The man asked about Keisha and Ms. Laverne and he answered without flinching in either direction. He did not paint them as demons. He did not paint himself as a hero. He said I was weak and I chose easy roads that led off a cliff. The woman took notes and then told him the options. If the bank finalizes restoration beyond what they already granted, there will be a balance their policy cannot cover. If you agree to a plan and you keep it, and if you stay out of trouble and attend counseling, a judge may consider a path that is not a sell. If you lie or you disappear, paper will do what it always does. It will find you where pride cannot hide you. He nodded and asked for the counseling number, and for the nearest place that needed a floor swept by a man who knows how to work. That evening he called me and the first words out of his mouth were not about him. He asked if I had groceries and if I needed help with the yard. I told him I had groceries because the Lord and the bank and a voucher made sure of it, and I told him the yard would be fine because Mother Ruth has grandsons who think a lawn is a gym. He asked if he could come by to leave something and I told him what I had told him before. Sunday afternoon. The porch. Not before and not inside. He said yes ma'am again, and that word did not taste like defeat. It tasted like a man stepping back into the house of his own manners. Consequence did not stop with paperwork. It walked with him down streets where men he once laughed with pretended not to see him because they did not know what to say. It sat with him in a job office where a clerk read his application and looked at the gap in his history like a canyon. It followed him to a community meeting where someone recognized him from a video and whispered, and then shrugged because gossip grows tired when Mercy shows up dressed in community service. He signed up to help at a food pantry because hands that give remember better than mouths that defend. He swept floors and loaded boxes and learned to stack dignity on pallets. He stood beside men who had carried other kinds of shame, and they taught him the trick of lifting with your legs, not your back, and the trick of breathing when regret wants to steal the air from your chest. He bought a notebook of his own and wrote down what he owed by week and by month, and he took that page to the bank when he met with a specialist who helps people rebuild credit without lies. The specialist spoke to him like a person, not a problem. She set up a plan that would not break him and would not forgive him too easily. She said, you will be surprised how many people come in here after choosing easy roads. She said the next right thing is a boring practice. He thanked her and left with a feeling that was not pride and was not despair. It was the feeling you get when a storm finally decides to rain, and you realize the roof you patched is holding. In my house, consequence arrived with smaller noises. The mail slot clicked and letters landed that used to make my heart race. Now they read like instructions that would not try to trick me. A provisional credit notice. A restoration letter. A list of support meetings for elders who have been used by people they love. I attended one in a basement room with bad coffee and good chairs. Women told stories that felt like mine and not like mine. A niece with passwords. A nephew with a smooth grin. A daughter who never learned to close her hand over money without wanting to share it with the wind. We nodded and we practiced sentences like I cannot and not today and you will need to ask someone else. I came home lighter than I left. I stood at my sink and watched evening roll across the window like a soft blanket, and I let myself feel two things at once. Relief that paper had worked. Grief that the boy I raised had been the man at that table where the card chirped red. The next Sunday Darius came to the porch at the hour I had set. He did not step onto the first board until the church bells finished their last ring. He set down a plain bag with a box of donuts that had no fancy glaze. He did not try to speak and I did not try to invite him inside. He said, I have a meeting tomorrow to set terms. He said, I will bring you a copy when they hand it to me. I said, you will leave it in the mailbox with the flag up so I know it is there. He nodded. He said, I am sorry, but he did not reach for a hug because apology without permission is just another theft. I told him one sentence. Keep doing the next right thing even when nobody claps. He left and the box sat on the porch like a small white peace treaty. I did not eat a donut that day. I gave them to the boys who play ball in the street because sugar can teach joy better than speeches. That night I wrote in my red notebook and I did not dress the words up for company. Consequence is a long road. Shame rides the bus. Mercy walks. Strategy drives with both hands on the wheel. I will let tomorrow arrive with its papers and its plans. I will brew my tea and I will breathe. The crash back home has ended. Now comes the road where a mother watches a son learn how to walk again with his own feet and his own name. Rebirth came softly at first, like the sound of the kettle before it whistles, like the second hand of the kitchen clock touching the next mark. I set boundaries in ink and in habit. The porch on Sundays only. No entry without permission. No phones handed across the table. No code spoken out loud. I taped a list by the back door where only I could see it. Breathe, call before you sign. Sleep on any decision that costs more than groceries. Write everything in the red notebook. The house learned the rhythm with me. I woke before the sun, prayed without many words, and wrote 3 lines each morning. What I know, what I fear, what I can do. The neighborhood answered the new quiet with its own steady noises. A bus sighed at the corner. A child recited spelling words on the walk to school. Somewhere a saxophone practiced scales that did not yet sound like music but promised it. On the first Sunday after the crash, Darius came again. He stood at the edge of the porch and waited as if the first board were a border he had to respect. He placed a small bag on the table and kept his hands in view like a man approaching a skittish animal. He said, "This is for the boys who hoop in the street and for the choir kids if they pass by." He did not look me in the eye long. He said, "I signed the restitution plan and I will leave the copy in the mailbox." I answered with a nod and with a sentence I had practiced. "I will read it on Tuesday, not today." He breathed out like a runner who has found a pace he can keep. He asked if he could sit on the top porch step. I said yes. We sat without speaking while a cloud slid across the sun, and the street figured out what to do with its shade. He told me that he had started meeting with a counselor, who did not let him lip gloss his choices. He told me the counselor asked him to write his own ledger, not money but decisions, a column called True and a column called Fast. He wrote that most of his mistakes fell under the fast side. I told him that most wisdom lives in the slow. He nodded and did not try to push past the boundary of this small talk into the room where old wounds live. I did not open that door either. Boundaries are not walls against love. They are frames that keep the portrait from sliding off the nail. During the week, Mother Ruth and I shaped the church forum into something that would serve elders who do not speak in headlines. We chose the fellowship hall instead of the sanctuary so people would feel like they were in a kitchen with good chairs. We brewed coffee that tasted decent and made a pitcher of sweet tea that tasted like home. Caleb came without a suit jacket and sat with his tie loosened. The bank officer wore flats and not the kind of heels that make elders nervous. The victim advocate brought forms printed in large type. We laid out pens that do not skip. We practiced our sentences. Report quickly, document everything, let the process protect you. I told my story in a voice that kept both steel and kindness. I said I am not a warrior. I am a bookkeeper who learned that the heart needs ledgers too. I said the red notebook saved my mind when my balance could not save my bills. People nodded and wrote down hotline numbers and asked if it was all right to cry while filing a claim. The bank officer said yes. The law moves on paper. Your tears do not smear the ink. After the session, a pair of sisters in their 70s told me that their nephew had moved in and then moved money. They thought shame was a lock on their mouths. They learned today that shame is a trick door. I hugged them and gave them a card with the advocate's number, and told them to sleep with their own notebooks under their pillows if that gave them courage. In my house, I kept the routines that make a life more than a story. I seasoned a cast iron skillet until it turned the color of evening. I rinsed beans and listened for stones in the pot because stones hide in good things. I called the utility company to keep my budget plan steady. I wrote a will of my own with a notary who watched my hand and checked my middle initial twice. I placed the will in the fire safe and wrote its location in the red notebook so nobody would have to guess during a hard season. Darius worked through his plan. He swept floors at the pantry. He learned to stack boxes so that weight rested on weight without hurting the bottom row. He showed up on time for meetings with the bank and with the counselor. He carried a small notebook that looked like mine and he wrote the things he owed. You cannot repay a mother the way you repay a bank. He learned that line by living it. He sent me a text each Friday at 6 with a one-sentence update and a copy of his receipt. It did not repair trust yet, but it kept the promise that truth can become a habit. The community noticed that our porch had turned into a classroom with a bell that rang only on Sundays. Boys dropped by to ask if they could help carry groceries. Girls asked for advice about summer jobs. A widower from 2 blocks over brought me a folding fan with a church name printed in blue and said I remind him of his own mother, who taught him to balance a checkbook with coins on the table. We held a second forum, then a third, then the pastor asked if we could make it a regular teaching. We did not call it Elder Abuse Awareness because that name tastes like medicine. We called it Keeping Your Ledger True. People came for the title and stayed for the tools. I felt the rebirth in my bones first and then in the mirror. My face still carried the map of a hard season, but my eyes did not flinch when I looked at myself. I slept through the night 3 times in 1 week. I walked to the corner without counting the steps like a punishment. I let light in through curtains I had kept half closed for too long. One afternoon the kettle sang and I poured tea and sat with the red notebook to write the page I had promised myself I would write when the time was right. It was not a letter to Darius. It was a letter to the girl I used to be. Dear Aggie, who believed that love would always look like help, I am proud of you for learning that help without boundaries is a river that floods your own kitchen. You made a plan and you kept it. You used paper like armor and truth like a lamp. You did not hit or shout. You did not beg or bargain. You let the systems do their work and you let your spirit do its healing. If you ever doubt yourself again, open this notebook and read the lines you wrote on mornings that did not want to begin. I signed my full name and added the date so that time itself would witness. The next Sunday brought a twist I had not prepared for and yet recognized as the exact lesson rebirth teaches. Keisha walked down my sidewalk in a dress the color of thunderclouds and stopped short of the porch steps. She held nothing in her hands. She said, I am not here to argue. I am here to say I am sorry. I did not answer at once. I let the clock tick 3 times. I told her that apologies are not keys to my door. She nodded and said I know. She said I am leaving Atlanta for a while. She said I will not contact you. She said I wanted to say to your face that I am not proud of what I did. There was no audience but the azaleas and yet the words felt like a stage. I told her I hoped she would learn to love things she did not own. I told her that if she ever finds herself tempted to put someone else's name on the same page as her wish, she should close the book. She nodded again and left with a posture that did not ask for rescue. I sat very still until the kettle cooled. Then I wrote 4 lines. Keisha came. She apologized. I did not open the door. I did not hate her. That night my sleep was clean. Darius kept to the porch. He did not test the edge of the first board. He brought a small bag most weeks. Donuts for the boys. A bouquet of grocery store flowers for the usher table. A book of Psalms once used with a name written in the front that told me he had bought it from a second-hand bin. He read out loud sometimes when the boys were gone and the street was quiet. He had a voice that still remembered childhood choir. He read the verses that talk about mercy finding us in low places. He did not ask for a hug. He did not pretend the damage was just a lesson. He let silence do its work. In counseling, he learned to call his fear by its name. He told me once in a careful tone that he had felt small since he was a boy watching men with loud shoes cross streets he could not cross. He said Keisha wore that loudness like a coat, and he borrowed it until it burned his skin. I told him the same thing I told myself after the divorce. What is borrowed will betray you. Own your quiet and make it strong. Community showed up in other kinds of mercy. A grocery bag on the step when my week was thin. A ride to an appointment on a rainy day. A deacon who fixed the porch rail without a bill. People do not give you charity when you stand up straight. They give you fellowship. There is a difference and it feels like air in your lungs. I returned the favor in the currency I had. I kept a book at church where I logged names of folks who needed a call, and I made those calls on Tuesday afternoons with tea in my hand. I sat with 2 widows while they learned to use their bank apps. I baked cornbread for the pantry volunteers on the day deliveries ran late. The balance of a neighborhood does not live in money alone. It lives in the count of chairs pulled up to a table when somebody says I am tired. The grace I had prayed for arrived not as a waterfall but as a season of steady rain. Bills balanced without drama. My joints ached but gave me enough to get to the porch. The bank finalized what they could restore and sent letters that read like math instead of apology. APS closed the active part of my case and sent a note that said call if you need to. Caleb stopped by once to drop off copies and refused to take a pie I tried to press on him because he said the work paid him already. The district attorney office sent a notice about Darius' progress. It was written in formal words, but I heard the human voice under it. He shows up. He pays on time. He meets his counselor. He volunteers. He is not a headline. He is a man in a long process. One evening the boys had already finished their hoops, and the sun was a ribbon behind the houses when Darius asked if he could read me something he had written. He stood 2 steps down from the porch and read a paragraph about fear and easy roads. He wrote that he had learned a rule he wanted to teach a nephew someday. If the plan requires your mother to be a ghost, it is not a plan. I felt the twist in my chest that comes when a child begins to speak in his own strong voice. I did not cry. I let the clock find the next mark. I told him to print the paragraph and tape it to his mirror. I told him to read it when he feels loud shoes calling his name. That night I opened the red notebook to the last section I had left blank. I wrote the lesson I will teach whenever a microphone or a kitchen table gives me 5 minutes. A mother's silence is not surrender. It is evidence. You took my money, but you could not spend my dignity. Justice walked in on its own feet because I gave it a path. Boundaries kept my door on its hinges and kept my heart from flooding my kitchen. Community lifted the other end of the heavy thing so I did not have to drag it alone. Grace did not erase what happened. It reorganized the room. I closed the notebook and placed it on the shelf next to the clock. The clock ticked and I felt not younger but freer. Family, tell me your city. Tell me the lesson you will take from this porch. Tell me if you have learned, as I did, that truth can be quiet and still be strong enough to move a mountain 1 inch at a time. The morning the story ended did not announce itself with trumpets. It came the way mercy usually does, in a small motion that could be missed if you were busy complaining. I woke before the clock reached 6 and sat up slowly so my bones would not argue. The kettle waited on the stove the way an old friend waits on a porch. I wrote 3 lines in the red notebook the way I do when I want my thoughts to stand in a row. Thank you for what is whole. Help me tend what is not. Let my words build and not break. The house felt like itself again. Not new. Not perfect. Simply honest. The window over the sink wore a thin breath of morning. On the shelf the notebook looked like it belonged there, and not like a bandage holding me together. My phone buzzed once and I let it be. Not every noise deserves an answer. I poured tea and stepped onto the porch where light had already begun to move across the boards in quiet squares. The street was waking. A bus sighed at the corner. A dog announced the day and then forgot what it meant to say. A boy in a school shirt walked fast like the clock had dared him to be late. This is the world I am part of. Not headlines. Not storms that ask to be named. A street that carries our days like a steady river carries leaves. Darius arrived at the hour I had told him to keep. He waited at the edge of the first board the way a person waits at a border they promised not to cross. He held a small envelope in a paper bag. He said good morning in a voice that had learned new weight and lost an old mask. He placed the envelope in the mailbox where the flag could lift and he set the bag on the table. I thought of the first time he brought me a school paper with a gold star, and how his eyes searched my face for the kind of approval that lasts longer than candy. Now he did not search. He simply stood the way a man stands when he has returned to his own name. He said this is the bank schedule they set and my receipts so far. He said the bag is for the choir kids. Books of psalms with notes in the margins from a second-hand store. He said I can start speaking at the forum if you ask me to, or I can keep sweeping floors if that is better. I told him that sweeping is a sermon most people need to hear, and that speaking can wait until words have soaked longer in truth. He smiled and sat on the top step with his hands quiet on his knees. We did not talk about Rome. We did not talk about legal letters or credit bureaus or the taste of shame. We talked about the weather and about the woman on the next block who keeps azaleas alive with a stubbornness that could teach a class. We watched the street invent its own music. A bicycle chain clinked. A radio 2 houses down practiced a gospel chorus on low. The air smelled like someone testing bacon and someone else rinsing bleach from a mop. After a while Darius stood and said he would come back next Sunday with whatever progress could fit in an envelope. He thanked me for the chair that was not offered and for the boundary that kept both of us safe. I nodded and he walked away with a step that did not need to be chased. When the mailbox clicked I opened it, and read the schedule without letting it own my mood. The numbers were honest. The plan did not flatter him and it did not crush him. It asked for work measured by calendar squares and by humility. I placed the paper in the safe and wrote a line in the notebook. Some debts are paid in dollars, some in days, some in the discipline of showing up. I cooked a simple breakfast and washed the pan and wiped the counter until it felt like a small altar. Then I dressed for church because it was the day we planned to close our series on keeping your ledger true. The fellowship hall filled with faces that had learned to open doors for each other without waiting on an invitation. The bank officer brought more brochures than last time. The victim advocate had a stack of forms with easier fonts. Caleb stood in the back like a sentry who knew the battle was not with fists but with forgetting. Mother Ruth hugged me with the arms of a woman who had seen many winters and always left enough bread for spring. The pastor asked me to say a final word. I did not bring a speech. I brought the kitchen voice that had saved me. I told the room that the story was not revenge. It was restoration with a spine. I said the line that had served me when my mouth wanted to bleed. You took my money but you could not spend my dignity. People murmured that low amen that sounds like a quilt being shaken over a bed. I said a mother's silence is not surrender. It is evidence. I said my red notebook did not cast a spell. It wrote a path for the truth to walk down. I told them the names of the doors I had used. Bank Fraud Department, Adult Protective Services, District Attorney Elder Abuse Unit, American Citizen Services. I said those doors are for you too. Not just for women in stories told on screens. For men and women who sweep their porches and bake their cornbread and keep receipts in a shoebox under the chair. After the forum, people lined up to collect phone numbers. They held pens like tools, not like props. A young woman from the youth ministry asked if she could interview me for a short video to help elders who do not come to church. I said yes if we could film it in the kitchen where I keep my notebook and my tea and my faith. We recorded 3 minutes that said what needed to be said. Report quickly. Document everything. Let the process protect you. Keep your boundaries in ink and in habit. We closed the hall by stacking chairs and laughing the way people laugh when a hard job has been done, and the floor smells like lemon and new plans. On the walk home, the sun sat low and generous. A neighbor waved from a porch and asked if I was resting. I told him I was practicing. Rest is not something you fall into. It is something you let yourself hold. At home, I set the kettle to sing and opened the red notebook to the last blank page I had saved for this moment. I wrote a letter to the future woman who would sit in my chair after me. Maybe my granddaughter. Maybe a neighbor who calls me Miss Aggie even if we do not share blood. I wrote this. Your worth is not a bank balance or a last name. It is the way you choose truth when Fast and Easy raise their hands and promise to carry your bags. If someone asks for a code, ask for a calendar and a witness. If someone offers a shortcut, make them show you the map and the tolls. If you feel shame trying to shut your mouth, write one line and say it out loud to your mirror. I am not your enemy to the person in the reflection when that person is about to betray you. I signed the letter with my full name and I dated it so time would be a witness. I placed the notebook on the shelf next to the clock and watched the second hand keep its promise. The story had brought me through suspicion and through pain, and through a public light that can burn if you stand in it without shade. It had brought me to a porch where a son sits on the top step and learns how to breathe like a man whose lungs belong to his own choices. It had brought me to a kitchen where tea steam looks like prayer, and where a notebook sits like a small anchor that does not brag about the ship it steadies. There was a part of me that still hurt when I thought of all those dollars leaving like birds. Money can be earned again. What mattered most had returned to its place. Not innocence. That does not come back once you see the machinery behind some smiles. What returned was dignity and a circle of care that made sure the heavy thing did not have to be carried by one back alone. I closed my eyes and said a quiet thanks that did not need to be eloquent. Then I opened them and spoke to you, family, because a story only does its full work when it becomes bread for the next person. If this found you at the right time, tell me your city in the comments. Tell me one lesson you are taking with you into your kitchen and into your phone and into your porch rules. If you have a mother or an auntie or a neighbor who needs to hear this, send it to her. If you want more calm true life justice stories, subscribe and come sit with me each week as we keep our ledgers true. We will fry the fish and share the tea and hold each other to the kind of love that does not require anyone to disappear. Truth wins when we give it a road to walk and company to walk with. The kettle sang one more time. The clock touched the next mark. I rested my hand on the counter and felt the house steady itself around me. Calm, dignity, hope. That is the only ending I needed.